February, it's cold, and they're yelling at him and they're throwing snowballs at his house. And, you know, they're trying to get the point across, you know, get out of here, tax collector, we don't like you, stop collecting the tax. And then he's not responding, he's not, you know, he's not amping the crowd up, they're just not hearing from him. So they start throwing rocks at his house. And then they start yelling, tear it down, like they're gonna tear the guy's house down. Now, again, this has been done before in Boston. They never, in the process, had hurt anybody. They always took them from the house and tore it down. And when they tore it down, they didn't steal what was in the house, they set it on the road. Right down to the foundation stones, they just left it all there. That was their message. This guy doesn't know that. He thinks they're gonna drag him into the street and kill him and his family and everything. So he throws open the door to his house. He has his musket in his hand. And the crowd's yelling at him. They think this is hilarious, right? And he fires, he yells for them to disperse. They won't. He fires his musket. I wasn't really even aiming. He didn't pull it up to his shoulder. He kept it by his side. But his shot hits a boy. 12-year-old boy, 12 or 13, in the stomach. And that boy is going to die the next day. He's poor. Had it been any normal day, no one would know this boy. He's a poor kid. No one would have cared, really. The people amongst the wealthy, the leaders of this argument, they did care. And among them was a man named Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams inherited his money, so he had time to be a dreamer. He was a true idealist. He really was. He envisioned a place, he envisioned basically a Boston that would be independent of the world, that would be a modern Sparta with people working only towards the good of the country, and he would be its colonial Leonidas. But dreamers, idealists, are also magnificent at messaging or propaganda. And Adams hears about the death of this boy and immediately reacts. He offers to bury him in his family burial plot, a very expensive proposition, right over here in the Granary Burial Ground. Before the boy dies the next morning, before that sun sets that day, he has gone to all the merchants he knows in Boston, the middle class, and he said, tell all of your workers to tell all of their friends to come to the funeral of this young man. Christian Snyder is his name. And they do. The next day they show up to his funeral. Up to 3,000 people. In a city of 15,000, that's a very large chunk of the population. Huge chunk of the population. Not too long ago, we buried Teddy Kennedy. Like the longest serving senator in the history of the world or something like that. He barely got 1/2 of 1% of the town's population. A poor 13-year-old kid is way over that. So they have the funeral. Adams also turns to a young African-American woman, a former slave, who learned to read and write and became a magnificent poet. Her name was Phyllis Wheatley. He said, Phyllis, write us a poem about this poor boy, and she does. It's a nice long poem, but she calls it Upon the Death of Christian Snyder. And the opening 2 lines are really the best of all. She writes, in heaven's court it was decreed, how the first martyr for our cause must bleed. Great piece of work. She's invoking heaven. She has taken the cause and made it our cause. Rich man, middle man, poor man. It's now our cause. And she's given us a martyr. Better yet, a boy martyr. This is spectacular. Adams has thousands of these things printed up. And he doesn't bother selling them in Boston. He puts them on ships and has them sent to London, where they're sold in the streets. About a couple weeks later, almost a month later, likely this would have passed. The king could have weathered this storm as just a kid, right? And it was an accident. Even everybody would admit it was an accident. But another boy is walking down this very street right here. And he's following a British officer that he happens to know. This officer had some work done by this boy's employer and didn't pay for it. So the boy got fired from his job and didn't have any money. So he's calling this officer a deadbeat, a cheapskate, rip-off, whatever, you name it. And the officer just ignores him. He walks over here, that building right there, which was much smaller back then, obviously. But it's interesting because it's a bank today. It's always been some form of bank, and it was the tax collector's house back then, or tax house it's called, where all the money went. And the officer walks in there. And the boys are standing at the front door yelling at him. You're a deadbeat, you're a cheapskate. He can't go in because there's a British soldier guarding the door. And so the soldier tells him to go away, and the kid won't. He keeps yelling, and he steps out of his little box and hits the kid in the face with his musket. Knocks him to the ground, maybe makes his cheek bleed or bruises him or something like that. This kid starts crying. Just woo-hoo-hoo. And he's not crying because he's been hit. He's poor. He's 13. He's been hit before. He's probably a very tough young man. He's crying because just a few weeks earlier, the British had killed a boy. And he's convinced this soldier's going to shoot him. And he doesn't want to die. Well, people start gathering around this kid and they start yelling at the British soldier, "What's wrong with you? Why are you hitting this lad? This is terrible." And of course, this attracts more people, and the mob gets bigger, and they're yelling at this soldier. They're threatening to strip all of his clothes off of him and drag him through the street before letting him go. He's terrified. I would be terrified. He didn't mean to start this kind of thing. So he does what all good soldiers would do. He calls out the guard. And the guard, the barracks is up here somewhere. They come running down the street, and they take up their quarters around the door of the tax house, just like they're supposed to. Well, this gets the crowd even more angry, more yelling and screaming and whatnot. Now they're throwing snowballs, hitting the soldiers with snowballs. These are British regulars. They can get hit by snowballs. They can take it. But one of them, either by chance or intent, had a rock in it. And it hits one of the British soldiers and knocks his hat off and his wig off. And he lands in the mud and the slush and everything else. And he gets up. Again, we don't know if he was hurt, but he's wet and he's tired. He was sleeping maybe, I don't know. But he's mad. I mean, what is up with these Yankees? Why are they always mad? And he jumps up from the ground, picks up his musket, and he fires into the crowd. We don't even know if he hit anybody. There's silence for just a moment. And all of a sudden, the crowd just goes crazy. It is out of control. They're screaming and yelling. They're throwing rocks and sticks and everything else. Somewhere in all this confusion, the other 6 British soldiers, there were 7 total, swear they heard the order to fire. And they, in unison, raise their muskets and fire into the crowd. Their shots go from that direction, right over where these people are standing, and all in between. 3 men die instantly, 2 will die within the next day or so. Once again, Samuel Adams, idealist and master propagandist, seizes the initiative. He has 3 of the bodies taken over to the Great Hall, the 2nd floor of Faneuil Hall, and put on display for everybody to come by and see. He agrees to bury them in his family plot too. When the other 2 die, he agrees to bury them. He has pamphlets printed up immediately showing caskets and skulls and crossbones, and he titles it, the event, The Boston Massacre. And does he sell these here in Boston? No, he ships them off to England. The king is starting to lose the information war. People, even the Lord Mayor of London is questioning why the king is killing his countrymen. What's going on here? Kings can't do this. This is devastating for King George IV. He has to react. He has to do something, so he orders the British soldiers out of Boston. And he also decides to cancel the stamp tax, to calm everything down. But this is not the final solution to his problems, because he still needs to pay for the common defense of his empire. We're going to talk about what happens next at our next stop, right here on the other side of this building. As we go by, take a close look at the top. You see the symbols of royal power up here, the unicorn and the lion. They still today are on the royal sovereign. Queen's flag, the exact same symbol. We'll talk about how they got up there. And on the way, you'll see this. You guys have probably seen it. This is kind of like a prehistoric CSI. John Hancock asked Paul Revere to draw this up. It's a forensic drawing of the deaths. The reason he did this is John Hancock, son of liberty, mean letter writer to King George III, believes so deeply in the law, he defends the British soldiers in their trial and gets them all off charges. None of them were convicted of murder. They were tried because they shot Englishmen, not Americans. There are no Americans. They shot Englishmen, and soldiers can't choose Englishmen. They were tried for murder. He got them all acquitted, save 2.
That was John Adams, right?
That was John Adams. Did I say Sam Adams?
You said Hancock.
Sorry, I apologize. It was John Adams. I apologize. So he gets them all off except for 2 who were found guilty of manslaughter. And even then, they couldn't prove they didn't hear the order to fire, so that's why they got manslaughter. Got a very light punishment, comparatively light, for the 18th century. So we're going to head across the street and just to the other side of the building. We'll let this bus go.